Hi y'all, welcome to the film strip. So today we're talking about the 1952 classic Singing in the Rain. You may or may not have seen it before. It's kind of the most popular movie musical of all time. We've skipped a little bit in time from the last movie. The Awful Truth is 1937 and this is 1952, so we hopped right over the 40s. There are a couple of reasons I decided to do that. One of them was that the 40s was mostly interrupted by World War II, so there weren't as many romantic comedies as such. There were plenty of romances. You can think about Casablanca, and there were some comedies, but most of them fell under the umbrella of support the troops musical reviews. While there are some early 40s screwball comedies, 1940s The Philadelphia Story comes to mind, I tend to think of the 40s as dominated by film noir. It's another genre that I love and I would love to talk about, but they're definitely not romantic comedies. So here we are in the early 50s and a couple of things are going on. One of them is the advent and popularization of the television. TV had actually been invented in the late 30s, but because of World War II, it didn't become popularized until the late 40s or early 50s. So by the 50s, it was actually popular enough to cause some concern and anxiety to Hollywood. They were worried that if you had a television at home, there would be no reason to want to leave and see a movie in a theater. So what they did was turn up the spectacle. Musicals in general have always been lavish. You can take a look at the Busby Berkeley movies. There's a lot of spectacle there. But the big thing about the early 50s musicals was the scale. You get cinemascope that could never fit on a television. You get color, you get big, lavish musicals, and Singing in the Rain is definitely a part of that. A lot of people have also talked about the anxiety of television finding its way into film narratives of the time, particularly with Rebel Without a Cause and also Singing in the Rain. Singing in the Rain is about the anxiety that Hollywood went through when it transitioned from silent films to talkies, but you can think about it as an allegory of Hollywood transitioning from pre-television to post-television. Okay, now that we have been properly contextualized, we can talk about the questions specific to Singing in the Rain. Regarding our general rom-com themes, this movie really makes me think about class. It's a very different representation of class than we've seen in the past two films. How does the film portray Cosmo's class versus Dawn's class versus Kathy's class versus Lena's class? The movie is full of high-class, glitzy Hollywood parties, but the characters themselves act a lot like working schmoes. In general, how is it portraying the class of Hollywood, and what does that say about the way that Hollywood thinks of itself? You can also think of this as pre-war representations of class and post-war. Why would the 1930s want to show off all this glamour, and why would the 1950s shy away from it? What's also interesting is that this is Hollywood talking about itself, but in a satirical manner. What does that do for the audiences? What does that do for Hollywood self-representation? What stories is Hollywood telling about itself? And how are you supposed to know that it's a satire? I myself have an answer for this, but I'm interested in hearing yours. So we talked a little bit about the comedy of the film, but we haven't really talked a lot about the romance. I think that's because the romance of the film is a little bit separate from the comedy, which is an interesting case for a rom-com. Are we sure that we want to call this a rom-com? A thing about Singing in the Rain is that it's a bunch of different elements mixed together. It's a period piece, it's a Hollywood satire, Lena's character arc is an over-the-top farce, Cosmo came in from vaudeville land, Dawn and Kathy's relationship is played completely straight, and Dawn and Cosmo are a buddy comedy. It should be a big old mess, but instead it's a perfect movie. So what you have is a comedy and a romance, and sometimes those things intersect and sometimes they don't. It's an interesting example of what may or may not be a romantic comedy. Another question that I sort of want to get to is what makes a healthy partnership. It's not necessarily part of a romantic comedy per view, but I think Singing in the Rain has a really interesting answer to this. I just really love the relationship between the main characters, and I think it's one of the reasons why this film is as popular as it is. And because it is a period piece, we get to talk about modernity again. What does that have to say about the timelessness of romance, of Hollywood, of movie musicals in general? That's it for what I want to talk about today. Be sure to join me at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live YouTube discussion Q&A. I've included a link to the syllabus in the show notes, and I also have my Venmo link. If you like this series and you want to see it continue, I appreciate any support. Be sure to like and subscribe because this is YouTube, and I will see you on Wednesday.